Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to this Toucan Diversity podcast. Now, today we're talking to Rob Trent, who is the new chair of Toucan Diversity. And hopefully, Rob is on the other end of this Zoom call now. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. Lovely day, and looking forward to getting stuck into some more of my artwork today.
Excellent. Perhaps then, being as you've mentioned your artwork, you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm a disabled person. I'm in my 60s, early 60s. I was born with a disability called arthrogryposis, which means I don't have many muscles in my arms and legs. And so I get around as a powered wheelchair user. I grew up and went to a special boarding school in Sussex. Then after that, I went to a few residential colleges and then a non-residential college, and eventually ended up with a job for a year at Southampton General. Then I worked for Ordnance Survey, where I worked for 30 years. In that time, I became passionate about disability, first through my interest in football. I'm a big football fan, and so I started doing some work with the FA on accessibility of football grounds and the Football Stadium Advisory Design Council. And that kind of inspired my sort of passion for improving access for disabled people. And now I run a website called Access Advisor, which is kind of like a trip advisor for disabled people.
Before we talk about your work then, Rob, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about the practical challenges you face on a day-to-day basis caused by your disability.
Of course, yeah. I think, well, one of the most interesting things is that where I went to a special school, everything was kind of in place. There weren't very many steps, so it was all institutionalized and very easy to get around. And when I left school, it was quite a bit of a shock, really. I thought the world would be a lot nicer place, but I found I couldn't get on buses. I could get on trains, but I had to travel in the guards van with sometimes lab rats and snakes and, sometimes aggressive football fans, and you're stuck in a guards van on your own, sort of in a cage. Public transport, football grounds were a challenge. In fact, almost doing anything was a challenge back in the day. And there still are challenges today. It's still not easy to just turn up to a train station and get on the train that you want. You have to book assistance, or you're supposed to book assistance. As a disabled person, if you want to try and get tickets for a concert, there aren't many spaces for disabled people, and trying to get them is almost like gold dust sometimes. So I think there are lots of challenges. Culturally, I think the world has moved to a better place than it was when I grew up in the 70s. People are more accepting of disabilities. Although I think in terms of finance for people, we're seeing, what with austerity, we're seeing a bit of a sort of step backwards in terms of disability rights.
In terms of your career, Rob, you've had a very successful career, first of all, as you say, for Southampton General and then the Ordnance Surveys. Many disabled people won't have been so fortunate. What was it about you that meant that, first of all, you were offered these jobs, and secondly, that you were able to succeed because you rose to quite a senior level, certainly at Ordnance Surveys?
That's a really good question. It's a really tricky one to answer. I don't know why. I feel like that I got really lucky, and I don't say, I'm not one of those that says, well, if I can do it, then anyone can. I don't know what circumstances led me to get there. Really, it was about determination for me. I knew when I left school that I didn't want to end up in sort of sheltered or residential accommodation. That was my preference. I didn't know that. I was never sure that it wouldn't happen, but that was in my mind. I knew that if I wanted to enjoy life, then having a job would certainly help in terms of being able to afford to live and do things and enjoy them. I just think it's not all down to me. I met the right people at the right time as well. I met someone when I was at college in Southampton who came and met me from the General, and was willing to take a punt on me. And the same with the civil service, really. When I joined the civil service in 1986, I went and did the exams, and And I was lucky enough to find a brilliant employer in Ordnance Survey who at the time, didn't have many accessible facilities, but went out of their way to make changes for me and to make me welcome. And throughout my career, they supported me in terms of mentoring and helping me find coaches to develop my career. So I think a lot of it is down to other people.
Did you ever experience any disability discrimination at Ordnance Surveys, or was it largely very positive?
Oh, it was largely very positive. I think, anything that I wanted to do, Ordnance Survey were behind me. And outside of Ordnance Survey, sure, I've met disability discrimination, been asked to leave pubs, but that was a long time ago because the wheelchair was a fire risk and all that sort of thing that people my age were quite used to having to put up with. And, you do meet discrimination in terms of people's attitudes as well, sometimes less overt than you would expect.
You talked about discrimination there, Rob, and you intimated that things have moved on considerably. Here we are in 2021. You're the chair of Toucan Diversity. How are attitudes now towards disabled people, and what do organisations like Toucan Diversity need to do to continue, well, hopefully improving things?
Well, I think attitudes towards disabled people, from my perspective, over many years have improved. I think disabled people have a voice now as individuals as well through social media. I see lots of disabled people on social media that aren't afraid to speak up for themselves as disabled people and make their voices heard. So we do have platforms. We don't necessarily have a power yet to really make things change, but I'm also a trustee for disability rights, and I think there are groups that are sort of user-led organizations that are really interested and rightly so pushing forward disability rights. And I think that that's got to come, and I think groups and organizations like Toucan, of which I'm proud now to be chair, I think now Toucan can take the mantle even further and offer disabled people opportunities and offer greater awareness of what it means to be a disabled person. And I've seen what they do through their work, and I think these are great times ahead for Toucan.
You talk about their Toucan picking up the mantle. From a practical perspective and a legislative perspective, what now needs to change to further develop the rights of disabled people?
I think disabled people's rights are enshrined in law, but they're almost very toothless. I think we need to keep pushing and need to get better rights enshrined in law and actually have someone that can enforce them. And it's not just oh well, they tried. And I think there are organizations that are supposed to represent our human rights, and I've had dealings with them in the past, and they don't seem interested in really pursuing cases for disabled people. So I think we've still got a long way to go, and hopefully I can be part of that journey for as long as possible.
You've joined Toucan Diversity as the chair. What was it that attracted you to the organisation?
I think what they do is fantastic. The way they're bringing out disability training to organisations and bringing awareness of disabled people's requirements to organisations and basically spreading the word for disabled people. And that's part of what I've been trying to do most of my life, is to show people that disabled people were not just there to for your inspiration. We're here to live our lives and get on with lives, and the easier that able-bodied people, the more aware they are of why we're here and what we can do for them, then I think that's got to be an improvement.
You made an interesting point there, that we're not here for other people's inspiration. How annoying is it for you when somebody says to you, "Oh, Rob, you're very inspiring"? How do you feel about that?
I'm at an age where I'm less angry about it than I see some people are. I do get frustrated by it, I do think people can be an inspiration, but for the right reasons. You know, you can be an inspiration for the job that you do or something that you've done. But I think just being an inspiration for being disabled and doing those things is kind of a bit, it's damning with faint praise almost. You know, it's kind of, well done now, you know, well done, and that's really great. And you know, people are inspirational. I'm inspired by people, so I don't see that disabled people can't be inspirational, but you know, it's got to be for the right reasons and not just being a disabled person.
And what would you want to achieve with Toucan, Rob? You know, you're obviously chair now. You'll be offering some strategic direction. Where would you like to take Toucan? What would you like to see it doing in the next 2 or 3 years?
Well, you know, I've looked at what they're doing, and I think they're doing it really well. I think my overall vision for Toucan is to see it grow, see it become more sustainable, see it, you know, become a leader in what it does. And you know, they've already got great people working for the organization, but I'm sure there are other people out there that could come along, work, and take it to a new level. So you know, that's really what I want to do, is to see if I can help. And it won't be me that's doing it, it'll be the people of Toucan and those that will be coming into Toucan in the future. I'm just there to try and help you know, steer it in the right direction.
And you talked there about steering it in the right direction, and you do have a lot of experience, both working in mainstream and for disability user-led organizations. How have those experiences shaped your view of disability?
When I left college and started working for Ordnance Survey, I kind of didn't have anything to do with disability organizations for you know, almost 30 years, and I kind of felt at the end of that 30 years, I felt it was time to put something back. Almost felt guilty that I'd sort of not been involved in the disability rights movement. But I read somewhere, and it made me feel a bit easier, that you know, for some people, actually getting on and just living life is kind of activism in its own right. It's an activist, you know. And so I felt a bit better about that. But when I first started getting re-involved with the disability movement, you know, I became much more aware of the issues that face all disabled people, not just myself as a powered wheelchair user. And that's the thing, you know, I became aware that, you know, there are lots of other disabled people that have different needs and different requirements. And you know, we've got to, you know, disabled people's organizations are there to really try and make our voices heard. And so I've become much more passionate about disability rights.
Do you think society is now receptive, willing to hear disabled people's voices, or do you think we're going to have to continue shouting very loudly?
I think we should never stop shouting very loudly, even if we think, you know, because there's always improvements to be made. I look back and I see drafts of improvement when I was a teenager. But I know now that young teenagers, disabled people today, face, you know, incredible frustrations. And to me, you know, I think, oh wow, you know, we've come such a long way. But I accept and appreciate that there really are important strides still to be made, and there will be in 20, 30, 50 years time. You know, it's a never-ending cycle of improvement.
I want to ask you about how you see things developing in 20 or 30 years' time in a moment. But one thing I do need to ask you about is your artwork, because you're, I think it's fair to say, quite an accomplished artist. So
Thank you.
just wanted to ask you about that. Again, the adaptations you've made for yourself as a disabled person.
Yeah, well, I got really involved again in art in around the late 90s when I became a student member of the Mouth and Foot Painting Artists. Back in the early days of painting, I was only painting maybe one evening a week because I was working full time. But since then, I've developed my art. I've had art lessons, and I've been to different art workshops, and I've got my own studio now. And I worked with a bunch of engineers called Remap who made me an easel which I can move up and down and tilt backwards and forwards, which means that it's one less thing that I have to ask someone else to do for me. And so I've got all my paints and my brushes set out where I can pick them up. I can pick the brushes up in my mouth without having to ask someone to do it. And so, having that independence and that freedom to be able to paint when I want without asking someone else to help me has really helped me develop. And, I love art. Even I'm retired. And when I retired 3 years ago, I said to myself, right, I really want to, develop my art as well as doing the disability work that I do. This is my hobby, and this is something that I love doing, and it's just so relaxing. Without the adaptations, things would be a lot more difficult.
The reason I asked you about the art is precisely because of the adaptations, because your hobby shows that there can be very few barriers for disabled people.
You're right, and I think again, I use the word luck, but I've also been stubborn and determined in trying to make sure that what I need, I want. And maybe I'm just lucky that I'm, a bit of a gobby person. I can, I will keep going until I try and get what I want. And some people may see that as negative and shouty, and they're probably right. But to me, it's what I've had to do, and it's what I'll continue to do, as long as there are things that I think, can be improved.
One of your other leisure activities is football. For reasons best known to yourself, you support Bournemouth, but good luck with that. Is football an accessible hobby these days for people like you, wheelchair users and other disabled people?
Well, it's much more accessible. Again, I go back to when I started going in the 70s. I was born in Weymouth, Dorset, and my dad took me to Bournemouth. So that's why, I became a Bournemouth fan. But when I started going, I was young enough to be carried up into the stands by my dad. But then as I became a wheelchair user, I found that clubs didn't have any facilities at all, no accessible toilets. And so, I started campaigning for better facilities. And there became a phase where clubs would then build sort of almost isolated facilities for disabled people behind glass screens, and, all disabled people are in the same place together. And lately we've seen moves away from that, where disabled people now can travel to away games or any game they like with their friends. Disabled people can travel to away games with their friends, and they can go and sit home and away with their friends in different parts of the ground, and not just where someone has decided that they should go. And there are still improvements that are being made all the time. I see that at Tottenham there is now seating that you can arrange so that you don't just have to go with one person. If you've got your family, your children, or your partners, you can go with them, and they can arrange the seating so that you can go as a family. And I think they're incremental changes, but they're really important for disabled people.
I guess football clubs and other organisations, service providers, are exactly the kind of company that Toucan Diversity could work with to provide advice on making things more accessible.
And I agree. I think, one of my sort of sayings is that you can have a place that is really physically accessible, but if you've got staff that are not aware of disabled people, or treat disabled people differently, it can be a completely inaccessible experience. And on the other hand, you can have a place that is really difficult to get into, but if that place has staff that are disability aware and really helpful, then it can become a really good experience. And so I think that what Toucan can do is to help that cultural aspect of disability and training and awareness. And I think that's just as important, probably more important, than the physical aspect.
And although you personally have had a very fulfilling career with ordnance surveys, there are still many disabled people who haven't had that kind of thing happen to them. And I guess, again, Toucan Diversity can help with organisations there to ensure that disabled people are treated fairly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I hope that as I learn more about what Toucan does and get involved with what they do, I'll be able to, provide some sort of my experience and help things move forward.
Well, Rob, here's the big question, okay? You are now in charge of certainly the UK, if not the world. and you have been for the past 20 or 30 years. What changes would have been made for disabled people that now mean our lives are pretty much, well, we are on a level playing field with everybody else?
I think what I would have implemented would to make disabled people involved in all steps of any process, design process, be it physical or digital or logical. Include disabled people in anything that you're doing, and be aware of diversity. And I would make people aware of disabled people and want to see disabled people involved in everything that's being done.
You mentioned their diversity, and I lied. That wasn't the last question, because I just want to ask you finally, how important is it to an employer or any other organization to be diverse?
I think it's very important. Your customer base is diverse. You want to reach out you don't want to reach out just to one section of the community, and you'll be able to reach out to a wider section of that community if your workforce represents a wider section of that community. I cannot see the drawbacks in being a diverse employer.
Rob Trent, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and good luck with your new role at Toucan Diversity.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to, getting involved and meeting everyone and finding out just what makes Toucan tick.